Wooden planters always seem to rot from the inside out, so I'm designing this one around a plastic insert that I picked up from the home store. I'll have a link to it in the description below. I'm building the planters with Red Grandis. Red Grandis is another suitable wood option for outdoor projects. It's fast-growing, sustainably harvested, and less expensive than some of the alternatives like Sepele or cedar. I'll start this project by ripping the legs at 1 3/4 inches square. Then I'll use the miter saw to square up the bottom of the leg. I wanted to add a decorative element to the bottom of the leg, but I didn't want to use a lathe. I think a lot of people will want to build this planter, and I didn't want the fact that you may not have a lathe in the shop keep you from building the project. I set the fence at 2.5 inches, the angle of the blade at 45 degrees, and the height of the blade at 1/4 inch for the first cut. I moved the fence to the other side of the blade and measured up from the bottom of the leg 3.5 inches for the second cut. I posted a detailed video on how to make this leg last week, and I'll have a link to that video in the description if you want to check it out. After readjusting the blade back to 90 degrees, I'll cut away the material between the two cuts. I should add that the blade that I'm using has flat ground teeth, and that'll make a nice smooth cut that will require less sanding. Now I'll set the miter saw at 10 degrees and then measure in 3/8 of an inch from the outside of the leg. I'll line the mark up with the saw kerf in the sacrificial fence and clamp a piece of plywood to the fence that will support the leg while I make the cuts. Now I can rotate the leg against the fence, making one cut on each side. If you'd like to build this planter, I'll have a link to the professional plans with all the measurements and materials you'll need for the project in the description below. It's a great time of the year to build it, and it's a fun project, so I hope you'll check it out. When I cut the legs to length, I'll set up a stop block and make a mark at 21 3/8. I'll set the angle of the blade at 7 degrees, make the cut, and then rotate the leg and make the second, third, and fourth cut. This creates a kind of pyramid-like design at the top of the leg. Now I'll get to work on the sides of the planter, starting first with the long horizontal pieces. I'll readjust the stop block and cut them to length. After readjusting the stop block again, I'll cut the shorter vertical pieces to length. I'm building the sides of the planter with pocket hole screws, and I'll drill the pocket holes at least 1 inch away from the edge of each side of the board. This should help to prevent any splitting or cracking when I'm driving the screws. Since the planters will live outside, I'm using the blue screws. These screws have a protective coating on them and are meant for exterior use. After attaching the two end pieces, I'll center the two middle pieces and try to keep an even reveal between the boards. Now that I have the sides assembled, I'll drill the pocket holes to attach them to the legs. I'll attach the sides to the legs 4.5 inches from the bottom. I made this little jig so I didn't have to measure each time, and this will give me an accurate straight line. The sides will be attached a 1/2 inch from the back of the leg. For this measurement, I'm using a piece of 1/2 inch plywood and tracing a line. Using a little wood glue, I'll clamp the sides in place and attach them with 1¼ inch pocket hole screws. You might notice that the pocket holes that I drilled in the sides are staggered, and that's so the screws don't meet or hit each other in the leg. Now that I have the planter assembled, I'm going to make a little decorative molding for the top and bottom. I'll start by ripping the molding on the table saw to 1¾ inch. Using a cove bit in the router, I'll add a decorative edge to one side of the molding. In case you were wondering, the router table is a new addition to the shop. I've actually had it for a few years, and when my son Walter came home for spring break a few weeks ago, he put it together, and I've been using it ever since. I would usually just use the handheld router to make a detail like this, but using the router table is probably safer and more accurate. To attach the molding, I'll square up one side and then hold it tight against the leg and make a mark on the other side for the next cut. I'll measure in 7/8 of an inch from the back of the molding and draw a line. Then I'll measure in 2½ inches from each side, make a mark, and also make a mark in the center of the molding. Then I'll use the drill press to drill 1/8 inch holes for the screws. I'll use a little wood glue, and this happens to be Type Bond 3, which is better for exterior projects. I'll clamp the molding in position and attach each piece with 3 3/4 inch stainless steel screws. I like the way stainless steel screws look on exterior projects if they're evenly spaced and it looks nice and neat. So I decided not to countersink and plug these screws, but just ratchet them down so they're flush with the surface of the wood. Once I'm finished with the top of the planter, I'll flip it over and add the same trim to the bottom. To support the bottom of the planter, I'll make cleats that measure 3/4 by 1 inch. I'll attach the cleats with wood glue and 2 1¼ inch exterior wood screws in each cleat. For the bottom of the planter, I'm using 5½ inch wide boards, and for this part of the project, you can use whatever you have in the shop. I'm using some of the Red Grandis left over from this project, and a few cedar boards that I had from another. For the finish, I'm using Total Boat's teak oil. I'll apply one heavy coat with a brush, let it soak in for 15 or 20 minutes, and then wipe it off in the direction of the grain. One of the last steps is to attach nylon glides to the bottom of the legs. This will elevate the planter off the ground a little and allow for some air circulation. I like to add these glides to the bottom of all the outdoor projects I make, whether it's a small table or a bench. It's just really important to keep the legs or the feet of the project off the ground so the end grain doesn't soak in the moisture. I'm using a 1/2 inch drill bit to drill a few drainage holes in the bottom of the plastic liner. And here are the planters finished, and I'm really happy with the way they turned out. And if you want to see what they look like planted, follow me on Instagram, as it's still a little early in the season, but I will be planting them in maybe a week or two, and I'll be posting images up on Instagram. And just a reminder, if you would like to build this project, I'll have a link to the plans down in the description below. It's a fun project, doesn't really take that much time, and it's just a great time of the year to build it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.